Conrad Ashby went still the moment he saw her, because the woman carrying a tray of champagne flutes through the crowded room had once carried his name, and the building everyone was toasting that night had once been hers. Laurel Beckett did not know, when she walked through the service entrance of the Fairmont Harbor Center that Friday evening, which event she had been sent to work. The staffing agency had sent her the address, a dress code, and a start time. She needed the hours. She took them. She found out the moment she stepped onto the floor. The Ashby Tower rendering filled an entire wall, floor to ceiling, backlit in soft gold light. The original presentation board, she had spent 3 weekends on that board alone, in the studio on King Street West while Conrad was in Vancouver meeting investors, now hung at the center of the ballroom like a trophy in a case she no longer had a key to. Laurel stopped walking. Someone bumped her shoulder from behind. She steadied the tray. Then she kept moving. Because that was what you did when you needed the shift. The Fairmont's ballroom was exactly the kind of room she used to walk into as a guest, high ceilings. Warm light pooling from custom fixtures she could price by manufacturer within a 3-second glance. Round tables dressed in linen so precisely pressed she almost reached out to test the fold. Every detail spoke of money spent with intention, and Laurel had once been the kind of person who spent it. She had designed her first commercial interior at 26, the same year she and Conrad married. By 30, she was lead designer on a mixed-use development in the Distillery District that had been shortlisted for a national prize. She had built a practice inside their partnership. Not the financial side, not the client relationships, just the work itself, the actual blueprints and material specifications and the quiet logic of how a building breathes, while Conrad handled everything surrounding it. She had trusted him with the business, because she loved the work too much to want to manage both. That had been her first mistake. There had been others, but that one had made all the others possible. The Ashby Tower was her third major project. She had started the concept drawings in January, 2.5 years before the marriage ended, working through 2 winters with the particular focus that comes when you know you have found exactly the right problem to spend your mind on. She finished the structural design package 14 months before Conrad handed the files to a lawyer and told her she had no legally recognized claim to anything under the firm's intellectual property umbrella, the firm that bore his name. The IP policy that had been quietly revised 9 months before he told her he wanted her to leave. She had been 29 hours into a design revision the night he sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said, with the measured calm of a man who had rehearsed it, that the marriage wasn't serving either of them anymore. She had looked at the half-finished model on the workbench, the scaled interior she'd been building by hand for 2 weeks, and she had not moved for a long time. The event tonight was the Real Estate Excellence Gala, the annual dinner where Toronto's development money dressed itself up in philanthropy and congratulated itself for building things. The Ashby Tower had won the Design Achievement Award, a distinction given to fewer than 5 projects in the award's 20-year history. From what Laurel could assemble from the printed program she'd spotted on a table near the entrance, Conrad would be accepting the award on behalf of the firm. His firm, not theirs, not anymore. Laurel adjusted the tray against her hip and moved toward the bar station. She had almost reached it when a voice appeared beside her. June Whitaker, that was the name on the older woman's staff badge, written in neat block letters, was refilling a tray of canopies with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had worked 1,000 rooms and stopped finding them remarkable. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back low and the kind of steady hands that come from decades of carrying things that mattered to other people without ever dropping them. "You look like you've been here before," June said without looking at Laurel directly. "I have," Laurel said, "just not wearing this." June glanced at her, then at the badge on her chest, then at the tray. No judgment passed across her face. "Have you eaten? There's staff food in the back and you've been on your feet since setup." "I'm fine." "You're not fine," June said in the same tone she might use to read a weather report. "I've got eyes. Eat something before the dinner service or you'll go lightheaded by the fish course." Laurel started to refuse again and then stopped, because her stomach had been empty since noon and she was tired of pretending otherwise. "I'll go in a minute," she said. June handed her a bread roll from behind the station without ceremony. Laurel took it and ate it in 4 bites while the guests drifted around them, and June said nothing more, which was exactly the right thing to do. In a room where Laurel had once been somebody, one practical woman treating her like a person felt like an unexpected mercy. She had not known how much she needed it until it arrived. She carried champagne. She cleared plates. She kept her head angled carefully down, not from shame but from the arithmetic of survival. There were people in this room who had known her as Conrad's wife, who had complimented her work at dinner parties and then, after the separation, had quietly archived her contact details the way you archive things you don't plan to use again. She did not need those conversations tonight. She did not have the reserves for them. For the first hour she managed it cleanly. Then, the room changed. It was a subtle shift, a brightening at the entrance, a collective straightening of posture. Conversations sharpened, laughter calibrated itself upward, slightly too bright, the particular register that certain rooms adopt when someone with money and momentum has arrived. Laurel knew that shift before she understood it, because she had lived inside it for 7 years and the body does not forget. She was at table 7, removing empty glasses, when she heard Conrad's name said 3 times in quick succession. She did not look up. She placed the last glass on her tray, straightened, and began walking toward the service station with the deliberate focus of a woman who has one clear destination and no peripheral vision. She almost made it. Laurel. Her name in his voice fell into the middle of the room with a weight she felt in her sternum before she consciously registered the sound. She stopped, stood still for 1 full second, then she turned. Conrad Ashby stood perhaps 12 feet away, in the charcoal suit she recognized from 4 years ago, because she had been with him the afternoon he chose it. He looked exactly as he had the last time she'd seen him, which was across a boardroom table with 2 lawyers positioned between them like furniture that had been arranged for this specific purpose. His face held the expression she had spent years learning to read, that careful blankness that was not neutrality but simply refused to give anything away. Tonight though, the blankness had a crack in it. He was staring at her with complete unpreparedness. She had never seen that on his face before, not once in 7 years. "Conrad," she said. It came out steadier than she had any right to expect. A woman nearby lowered her wine glass half an inch. Someone else slowed but didn't stop. The room developed that self-conscious quality. Conversations thinning at the edges, attention pooling toward something that felt private but was happening in public. Conrad took 1 step toward her. "I didn't know you were going to be." He stopped, started again. "The agency didn't tell me who they were sending." "I didn't know it was your event," Laurel said. "I came in through the service entrance." The word service moved between them, carrying more cargo than she'd put into it. She watched him absorb it. The uniform, the tray balanced against her hip, the staff badge, the full context of what she was doing in his room. She watched him understand that she had not come here to confront him, or accuse him or make a scene at his gala. She had come here because she needed to be paid. Something moved across his face then. Something she didn't have a name for, and didn't want to spend the effort finding one. "Laurel. Excuse me," she said, "I have tables to clear." She turned and walked, and she did not let herself feel anything until she was behind the pillar near the far wall, with her hand braced against a linen-covered table, and her heartbeat going at a pace she didn't like. She pressed her palm flat against the tablecloth and waited for her breathing to even out. It took less time than it used to. That was the honest metric of how far she had come. Not happiness, not success, just the narrowing gap between disruption and recovery. 14 months ago, a 3-second exchange with Conrad would have sent her spiraling for hours. Tonight, it took 2 minutes. 2 minutes, she'd take it. She picked up her tray and went back to work. She was not prepared for Tessa Brandt. She had heard the name once several months ago in a message from a mutual contact that she had read and closed without responding to. She knew the rough shape of the situation. Tall, early 30s, worked in real estate communications, moved in precisely the orbit Conrad had always occupied. Laurel had chosen not to know more than that. There is a particular kind of energy that comes from carefully not knowing things, and she had been conserving it. Tessa moved through the room in a deep burgundy dress with the ease of someone who has made her peace with being watched. She was striking, and she knew it, and Laurel was not the kind of person to pretend otherwise as a way of managing her own feelings. What she hadn't accounted for was Tessa, crossing the room specifically toward her. Laurel was at table 4, realigning a centerpiece that a guest had displaced when she heard the heels, slow and deliberate on the marble, the kind of pace that has somewhere specific to be. "You're Laurel," Tessa said, not a question. "Yes." Tessa's gaze moved over her from the top down, the uniform, the apron, the champagne stain near her sleeve that had been there since hour 2. She took her time with it and she did not pretend she wasn't. "Conrad told me about you," Tessa said. Her voice was pleasant. That was the weapon of it. The pleasantness, the performance of mild curiosity when what was underneath was something else entirely. "He said you were the designer before." Before that small word did a lot of work. "I still am," Laurel said. Something shifted in Tessa's expression, a brief recalibration. Then, "He said you weren't suited to the pressure, that you took things personally and fell apart when it counted." She paused, and the pause was designed to land. "Honestly, I gave you more credit than that. But looking at this, a gesture that encompassed the uniform, the tray, the room, maybe he knew what he was talking about." A woman in a cream blazer at the nearest table had stopped mid-sentence. She was looking at her wine glass, but she was listening. They were always listening. The version of Laurel that had existed during the marriage would have explained herself. Would have reached for the Kitsilano contracts, the Forest Hill renovation almost complete. The firm she was quietly rebuilding from a desk in a shared office on Adelaide. Would have assembled evidence of her adequacy for an audience who had already formed a conclusion and was not interested in revising it. She had learned slowly and at some cost that this impulse to justify herself to people who did not wish her well was not generosity. It was a habit, and habits could be broken. Laurel set the centerpiece down with care, aligning it precisely. Then she looked at Tessa Brandt for one long even moment, the kind of look that does not perform and does not flinch. "Thank you for introducing yourself," she said. "Enjoy your evening." She picked up her tray and moved to table 5. She heard Tessa say something to the woman in the cream blazer, something clipped and social, designed to reframe what had just happened in Tessa's favor. She didn't catch the words, she didn't reach for them. What she noticed was her hands. They were steady, completely unremarkably steady. She had expected them to shake. They didn't. That small fact told her something important about where she had arrived, quietly and without ceremony in the past year. There had been a version of herself for whom Tessa's words, "He said you fell apart when it counted," would have found every doubt she was already carrying and made them louder. That version had believed, somewhere beneath everything else, that Conrad's assessment of her was accurate, that she had been the problem, that the dissolution of the marriage had been, in some way she couldn't quite articulate but deeply felt, her failure to be enough. She no longer believed that. She believed it the way you believe something that used to hurt you. She could describe the wound, she could trace where it had been. But the wound had closed, and what sat underneath it now was not grief. It was the quiet bedrock of someone who had spent 14 months learning, day by careful day, what she was actually made of. June found her near the bar station, silently passing her a plate with chicken and roasted potatoes from the staff tray. Laurel started to wave it away. "Don't," June said. Laurel ate. "The one in burgundy," June said, refilling a water pitcher without looking at Laurel. "She came looking for you." "She found me." June made a sound that was not quite a word, just a considered noise from someone who recognized a pattern when she saw it. "You all right?" "Yes," Laurel said, and this time it was true enough to say without qualification. June looked at her for a moment. "I've been watching you all night," she said. "The way you carry yourself in this room. The way you know where things go before anyone tells you. You've been here before in a different way, haven't you?" It was not a question either. June seemed to operate mostly in certainties. "Yes," Laurel said again. "Then you know that woman was trying to make you small," June said. "And you also know it didn't work." She handed Laurel the water pitcher. "Table 12 needs filling." Laurel went to table 12. The dinner service moved around her like a current. She worked inside it, clearing and refilling and attending to the small endless details that kept events like this from revealing how much maintenance they required. She was good at this work, not because it came naturally, but because she was good at anything that required precision and discretion, and those qualities transferred across more contexts than people expected. Around the third course the evening program began. Awards, speeches, the specific cadence of public congratulation that required everyone to appear moved while thinking about something else. She was at the back of the room when the Design Achievement Award segment started. She stopped moving without deciding to. The video package played across 2 screens, aerial footage of the Ashby Tower under construction, then finished, then lit at dusk against a pale February sky. She recognized the footage from the groundbreaking which she had attended, standing in the cold field with her hands in her coat pockets. She had been present for the topping-off ceremony too. She had watched the final beam go up from 30 feet away, and she had not told anyone what she felt, because Conrad had already told his lawyers to file the amended IP agreement, and she had known by then what was coming. The voiceover described the building in language she recognized. Not her exact words but her ideas, the passive ventilation integration, the heritage facade retention, the street-level activation of what had been a dead commercial corridor, the decision to orient the primary atrium toward the lake rather than the financial district. She had argued for that orientation for 6 months. Conrad had called it impractical. She had run light studies at 3 different sun angles, in winter and summer and equinox, until the data said what she already knew. He had eventually stopped arguing, not because he agreed but because she had made disagreement too expensive. Applause filled the room. Conrad walked to the stage. Laurel looked at the floor. She was not going to stand in the back of a room full of people who couldn't see her and cry about this. She had made that decision at the start of the shift and she was keeping it. but she reached into her pocket and touched the edge of her phone. The photographs were still there, organized 3 months ago at her lawyer's instruction into a folder she had named, with characteristic lack of sentimentality, simply evidence, original concept sketches with her handwriting in the margins, progress images tied to her personal cloud account, not the firm's server, an email thread in which she had presented the atrium orientation argument to Conrad in writing, attached to the full light study she had run herself. Her lawyer was preparing the filing. It was not tonight's battle. She was reminding herself of that when a man at the nearest table said, in a low voice that was not meant to carry but did, "The original concept design on this project was a woman's. I saw her name on the early jury submissions, Beckett, I think. It wasn't in the final documentation." Laurel went completely still. She looked at the man. He was perhaps 70, with white hair, a very straight posture, and the kind of dark suit that belongs to someone who has not thought about fashion in 40 years and is correct not to. She placed him after a moment, Hugh Carver, who had designed the Broadfield Library and 2 other thriftic buildings that had shaped what Toronto's waterfront looked like from the island. He was one of the 3 senior panelists on tonight's jury. He was not speaking to Laurel. He had not noticed her at all. He was speaking to the woman beside him, who was nodding with the expression of someone processing new information and deciding what to do with it. Laurel stood still for one full breath. Then she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "my name is Laurel Beckett." Hugh Carver looked up at her badge, then at her face, then back up at her face with an expression that shifted from polite attention to something considerably more alert. "I thought you might have left by now," he said. His voice was calm but not casual. "I'm working the event." He received this without surprise, a long beat, and then, "I would like to speak with you." "I'm available now," she said. He stood, said a brief word to the woman beside him, and gestured toward a quieter section of the entrance alcove. Laurel followed him, tray still in hand because there was nowhere to set it. "The original submission to the award jury included documentation under your name as primary designer," he said, without preamble. "The final filing attributed the work to the firm alone. When the discrepancy was flagged internally, we didn't have adequate documentation to pursue it." He paused. "I've been watching the service staff all evening trying to determine if you were the same person." "I am," Laurel said. He nodded. One of those nods that costs something to give because it carries weight in both directions. "Do you have your own documentation?" he asked. She took her phone from her pocket. She did not make a speech about it. She did not explain the divorce, or the lawyers, or the particular cold morning when she had sat on the floor of her apartment, trying to understand how something she had spent 3 years building could be taken from her without her agreement. She simply opened the folder, found the first image, and turned the screen toward him. He studied the photographs carefully, the time-stamped concept sketches, her handwriting filling the margins in the cramped, precise way it always had when she was working through something complex, the progress images, the email chain, partial but clear, in which she had argued for the atrium orientation and attached the full data. "These are legally time-stamped," he said. "Yes." He returned the phone with the deliberateness of someone handling something that deserved handling with care. "I'm going to give you a contact at the award registry office," he said. "Tell them Hugh Carver asked you to call. I'll be letting them know to expect you." He looked at her steadily. "What happened here was not correct. The record should not stay as it is." Laurel held the phone and said nothing for a moment, because she needed to be certain she had heard him accurately. Then she said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you for not leaving." She walked back to the service station. June was there, stacking glassware with the unhurried method of someone who never needed to be told twice. "You all right?" June asked. "Yes," Laurel said, and then after a moment, "Actually, yes." June handed her a fresh tray without ceremony. Across the room, Conrad was still near the stage, the award plaque in one hand, accepting congratulations from people whose names Laurel mostly knew, and whose opinions she had, over 14 months, systematically stopped needing. She watched him for a moment, not with anger, which would have required an energy she had long since redirected elsewhere, and not with longing, which had been the last thing to go, fading in increments until one evening in January, she had realized it was simply gone. She watched him the way you watch a door that once closed on you. You can acknowledge it was there. You can remember that it mattered. But the door has no authority anymore, and eventually even the memory of its weight becomes just information. Conrad looked up and found her eyes across the room. She was not sure if she had moved or if he had simply tracked her out of habit. It didn't matter. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, long enough to let him see that she was not broken, not diminished, not the woman he had left at the studio at 2 in the morning with a half-built model and no answer for what came next. Then she turned and walked back to the tables she still needed to clear. The evening wound down around her in the ordinary way evenings do. Dessert, coffee, the slow dispersal of guests who had made their calculations and pronounced the night worth attending. Laurel worked through all of it, the same as she had worked through the past hour, steadily without performance. She was collecting the last of the linens from the far side of the room, when she became aware that someone had stopped a few feet behind her, and was not moving on. She turned. Conrad was standing at the edge of the dismantled table, his jacket still on, the award plaque held at his side. He looked less like the man who commanded rooms than like a man who had spent several hours understanding something he had been avoiding. "I wanted to," he started. "You don't need to," Laurel said. "I think I do." She looked at him, gave him the full weight of her attention, which was no longer a small thing to give. "Maybe," she said. "But not tonight. Tonight I'm finishing my shift." He stood there for another moment. She could see him trying to find the version of this conversation, where he came out differently, and discovering there wasn't one. "The building is good," he said finally. It came out quietly, with an honesty that surprised her only because it sounded genuine. "It was always going to be good because of what you put into it." Laurel folded the last linen and set it on the stack. "I know," she said. Not with bitterness and not with warmth. With the simple accuracy of a person who is done needing someone else to confirm what she already understands about herself. She picked up her bag and walked to the service exit, and she did not look back. Outside, the spring night was cool and still carrying the last edge of winter, the way Toronto nights do well into May. The lake was 3 blocks south and she could smell it. That particular combination of cold water and city that she had grown up with and never been able to leave behind even when everything else had fallen away. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. She had a contract to sign Monday morning. A residential tower on the waterfront, a firm that had sought her out specifically, that had told her in clear language they wanted her name on the drawings. A number she had negotiated across 3 weeks of careful conversation, and the number was enough. She had Hugh Carver's card in her pocket. She had the photographs still there, still time-stamped, still true. She had a life that was hers, built back from nothing, from a small desk in a shared office and freelance contracts and weekend catering shifts, and the particular stubbornness of someone who has been told what they are and chosen not to believe it. Inside the Fairmont, the lights would be dimming, the gala would be ending. Conrad Ashby would collect his coat and his plaque and whatever remained of the evening. Tessa Brandt would say something sharp and well-crafted to the woman in the cream blazer, a final edit on the story of the pregnant pause in the middle of the event. None of it would change what Laurel was carrying out of that building. The bus came down the street, and she raised her hand. On the ride home, she pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and watched the city move past. All that lit up, indifferent, enormous city. The one she had been building things inside for her entire adult life. She thought about the atrium she had designed, and the way the light would come through it at noon in February, exactly as she had calculated. She thought about the lake-facing orientation, that Conrad had called impractical, and the fact that it had won the building a national award. She thought about June handing her the bread roll without being asked. She thought about Hugh Carver saying, "Thank you for not leaving." She had stayed in that room tonight because she needed the shift. She was leaving it because the truth was now in the right hands. Those were different reasons, and both of them were hers, and she was done apologizing for the distance between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Some people mistake endurance for failure. They see a woman who has lost a firm, lost a marriage, lost a name she had stitched into her work for years, and they see someone the world has sorted correctly. Someone who was tried and found wanting. But Laurel Beckett had sat in a cold office and run light studies until the data was undeniable. She had built scale models by hand in a studio at 2 in the morning because the problem was worth solving. She had carried her work through a divorce and a legal stripping and 14 months of rebuilding while working weekend events and answering emails at midnight, and never once telling anyone it was too much. She had not been discarded, she had been surviving. And quietly in the back of a moving bus, with the city dissolving past her in the dark, she let herself know it.